Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of the Low Code Approach. I'm Sean Feeney, a senior product marketing manager on the Power Platform team and part-time lumberjack. And today I'm joined by...
It is I, the security Grinch, here to mess up your holiday season, Jocelyn Chow from Power Platform and Dataverse Security. And I'm here with...
I am here as well, Ken Aguilard, fresh off, or I guess I should say fresh into a Texas winter. It is a chilly 62 degrees over here right now. I do have my beanie and my sweater on. Wendy is not with us, as you might have guessed, because the elf on the shelf has stolen her bacon. So she is busy chasing that person and trying to recover her bacon as usual. Jocelyn, who is with us today in this episode?
Today we have somebody that either had the privilege or misfortune to share a session with me recently at Microsoft Ignite. I'm joined by Scott. Scott, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Tell us about you. Where do you work? What do you do? Why do you have to deal with me?
So my name is Scott Magee. I work at Microsoft with Jocelyn. So I'm a principal product manager in the Dataverse team. So Jocelyn and I are both work on the Dataverse Foundations team, and we essentially work on platform-wide enablements across, security specifically, but across all kinds of other things. So our team really gets a taste of everything in those apps.
Awesome. And Scott, you specifically drive an integration with a really key part of overall Microsoft security offerings. Tell me about that.
Sure. I've been charged of integrating Purview with business applications. And what that means is Purview itself is a whole host of security compliance and data governance tools. And when we're looking at that, typically it hasn't been integrated quite as much with business applications, except for limited cases around like audit and some really great stuff there. And what we're looking to do is expand that footprint across all business applications.
Very cool. So, as Jocelyn mentioned earlier, and I love the affirmative head shake that you gave when you said misfortune of being teamed up with her for a session. That was great. But also mentioned that you guys did do a session. So can you give us like an idea of what was discussed in that session? And of course, we'll point to the relevant documents in the show notes in here. But what product are we talking about? What integrations and security are we talking about for Power Platform here?
Sure. Jocelyn, again, we had the fortune/misfortune of presenting together Ignite in Chicago. What we did was we gave a real world scenario of how Purview can work with Power Platform Admin Center, colloquially known as PPAC. So what we're looking at there is to see how an actual interaction, as we're looking at the adoption of Copilot and the integration of really looking at how it can look at all the different data you have access to. What it does is sort of challenges your assumptions of what security actually means in your organization, because you may have your roles locked out. You may have all these other RBAC, really role-based access controls in place. But what you're looking at is you might have access to data that you may not realize you have access to for some of your different users in your organization. And so what Jocelyn and I did was we walked through an end-to-end scenario where I can look at, maybe I set up a chat for my front desk at a healthcare organization. And what I did was really FAQs and maybe just to get some patient information around looking at billing. And so when I interact with that, I could actually access SharePoint, and SharePoint could be automatically have Microsoft information protection labels applied, where it really just identifies that sensitive information. And then when I start talking to it, I might find out that I might get some information I shouldn't have. And so what Purview does here is really help to make sure you don't have those leakage opportunities, those parts where you have like over access, where you didn't realize you had it. And so we tested an example where I asked for a patient's name, and I actually got a patient's name and address, but I also got her diagnosis. I probably shouldn't need to get that, especially when it could be a HIPAA violation. So what we looked at was how I could potentially change that, increase the information protection label, and then it gets removed from the Copilot responses. Great. So that agent is secured how we want it to be. But then Jocelyn showed a couple extra ways where we could lock that down and put additional guardrails in place to say, maybe I could limit sharing. Maybe I can put other ways to really limit the effect of something like this happening, either through information protection or looking at ways I can really guard that moving forward to say how I can limit the risk of that moving forward.
So then you talked about what you did in that session, and then we said that Jocelyn went from a PPAC point of view and did some other things. Can you talk to me a little bit more about the differences in what you can do in Purview versus what you can do in PPAC? Are these the same people? Did we play the same persona?
Right. And so we didn't. So I played the Purview administrator, and Jocelyn played the Power Platform Admin Center administrator. And so what we're looking at is your first line of defense truly is your role-based access controls in Power Platform. And so that security model is already in place. And that is your first way to make sure you have access to the data you have access to. But what we looked at is how you have that additional layer and how Purview can essentially provide additional protections on top of that to say, even though I have access to some data, maybe I don't want that data to come back inside of those responses. And so what I'm able to do is identify that information with those sensitive information types or specifically just labeling it. And so when I do that, I've actually added that another layer to say this across the board as it's highly confidential. I don't want it to be seen in here. And so we get those extra protections in Purview. And what we're seeing in Purview also is some adaptive controls. And so things that we didn't get to show there, that things that we're hopefully getting to see soon is around how you could say, as I'm seeing behaviors, or as I'm seeing patterns of access that I don't want to see, I can start increasingly isolating that in a more automated approach. And those are things that we're excited to start seeing. And it does exist in modern work, but we're looking to see how we can get that into business applications.
Saying Purview is like saying Copilot. Which Purview are we talking about?
Yes, Ken, that's an awesome question. Purview is a monster. There's so many different applications in there. And so if you go to Purview, it used to be compliance.microsoft.com. And so now it's purview.microsoft.com. And I think that that name change is evident because originally it was a bunch of security and compliance tools. And so if you go there, you'll find everything from audit, something that you can automatically send now. And so those are sort of some base level attributes. Then you have information protection, where you start, you look for sensitive information types. And so these pattern-based classifiers that might be a social security number, a phone number. Then you might actually have a catalog where you could say, hey, I have a multi-cloud environment. And so you might have a bunch of Dataverse environments. You may have a bunch of Amazon S3 and Snowflake environments. I want to be able to see all my data together in one spot and what's called a data map. And I want to be able to see where that sensitive information might live across my entire multi-cloud tenant. So at Microsoft, we want you to be on Microsoft. We also realize you may have some other vendors too. You can see all that here. And so that in itself gives you that visibility to understand where that data may live. And then you understand how I need to protect it. And so you have other ways to protect that using data security controls. And then from a compliance standpoint, something that we're not even talking about here, but let's say as a compliance standpoint, Jocelyn's been doing some pretty shady stuff. So I have to do a e-discovery. I can really set up for the e-discovery, I can actually set up a case. And so I can look at all of Jocelyn's digital interactions across my Microsoft platform, and I can start building that case to say, is she doing something that she shouldn't be doing? And I can start building that. And that's really more of a legal compliance tool. But what you're seeing is you're having different user types because Purview's really been built around chief data officer, information security, risk and compliance. And what we're doing is we're expanding that to information protection on a data security level to say, how can I balance that security and compliance need with my need to actually be productive in my organization?
One, yes, Jocelyn is shady, but even though she's barely tall enough to cast a shadow, that aside, what can these Purview products be applied to? Like, I know you talked about information protection. Are we talking about databases? Are we talking about files? Are we talking about chat? What exactly is this? What does it encompass? What is it that we are detecting?
Sure. And so Purview really has this way to help you protect the enterprise data across this whole age of AI for different access. And what that means is you're looking at structured and unstructured data. You're looking at the ability to see, across databases, across files. And so what that matters is we have these different sources. And so we're looking at everything like, Snowflake as an example, Dataverse as an example for us that's particular. We have support for and specifically in Dataverse for structured data. And so what we can do is look at the column level and find that sensitive information and really dive in to say, I've identified this, I can label it so you can see that across. And then I could potentially choose to protect that too. So we're looking at that across the board. Some of the other environments, so if you're looking at SharePoint, you're looking at Outlook, you have some additional depth of capabilities there. And so this is, depending on how you use it, you can use it quite a bit to get that comprehensive view, or you can have just a general understanding of saying, just show me where my sensitive information is, period. And that just demystifies it a lot already because you get that visualization that you just didn't have.
Thank you, Scott. So, question, you mentioned in the session that you and Jocelyn did at Ignite in Chicago that you play the role of the Purview admin and Jocelyn play the role of the Power Platform admin. Are those the only two parties that are involved in a successful implementation of Purview and Power Platform together, or are there other parties? And if you were working in change management to kind of implement Purview, who else would you involve in that process to ensure success?
Sure. So as far as when you're implementing Purview, it's actually a very multi-pronged approach. And so when we're seeing that, you have, even on the Purview side, there could be some sort of a chief information security officer or a data security person. You might have a compliance administrator. And then you, on the Power Platform side, you have someone else here that could be, a tenant admin or environment admins of that level. And so what we're finding is this is actually a highly orchestrated, coordinated effort to implement correctly. And it can take time. And we're hearing that it can take upwards of 2 to 6 months to fully implement this, because when you're doing that, information security is a funny thing, right? If you get too restricted too soon, you shut down everything. You shut down production workloads. You're in a place you don't want to be. And so what you start looking at is you start working at a progressive level to ramp up to the level of security you need to enable your use cases, and also to understand what your risk profile is. There's ways to segment that to make it higher security, higher risk in different areas. But what we're finding out is that coordination of effort can take a little bit of time, because those folks sometimes don't always talk to each other, and definitely the administrative roles don't always overlap. So you usually don't have one person that plays all those roles. And that's by design, because there's different needs for those different application surfaces too.
Segregation of duty, Scott.
Yes.
Segregation of duty.
Yeah.
So I hear that that can be a challenge, but it is also intentionally by design in some sense. What are other challenges that organizations might have to overcome when starting to adopt Microsoft Purview for their enterprise needs? And what would you recommend as best practices in order to overcome those?
I think, again, the common issue is a lack of coordination and communication among those different roles. Because again, everyone's really they'll be successful in their vertical, and so in their role. So information security wants things completely locked down, risk wants things locked down. So you're looking at ways to really reduce those issues. But then you also have the thing where we're mentioning you want to balance that security profile, the risk profile, with the ability to be productive. And so that is a back and forth discussion to say what is useful, what is necessary. And it also, again, challenges your assumptions of what should I have access to, who should I have access to it, and then do we need additional controls? Do we need to test that? And so it's very much an iterative process. And so I think for best practice is to make sure we've heard that integration can be the best and the fastest when these teams work together with a common goal and a shared understanding to say, I have my goals. I understand what your goals are. Let's have a shared goal together. When we're looking at maximizing individual ones, that can actually increase the implementation time and could also reduce the efficacy initially.
Scott, so you gave a presentation. I think I've alluded to this like 16 times already on this podcast. Besides that one use case, are there any other use cases that you think we should highlight for customers where Purview integration with Power Platform helps them reach success, especially faster with agents and Microsoft Copilot? Is there anything that you think they should really take a deep look at when trying to use agents in their organization?
Definitely. So we touched on this in the presentation, but I think it's worth mentioning again is around you have the ability to see what are these events that are happening. And so from an audit event, we're able to see these admin level events to say who's creating copilots, who's sharing copilots, who's doing all these new things. And we're looking at copilots, not just across business, in terms across Copilot Studio with agents, because that's actually a potential proliferation risk, but you can actually see what's happening here. You can also see the same with interacting with copilots when you're talking to an Excel document, when you're talking to Microsoft 365 Copilot. So all your Copilot events going into one place in Purview. So that's a pretty great view to see all your AI events there. We're building something, but then we're looking at the next step, the AI interactions. And so those are getting logged too. And so as we're looking at that, that's going in Copilot Studio. And that's something we showed in the demo as well, where you're able to see not just these admin events, creation events, sharing, but you're able to see what's actually being said. And so you can see those prompts and responses in your organization. And the great thing about that is what Jocelyn and I showed was that you can start looking at actually live DLP happening, where you can see the fact that there's data loss protection happening. And so I'm able to see what sensitive information types are being discussed. And so I could actually see that there's a sensitive information type that's allocated. So again, it's a pattern-based classifier to look at something that could be sensitive. And we're able to see that happening in real time in a conversation and that response. And so you can actually look through and see those responses getting called. You could see what documents are being served to give those responses back in the AI. And so you can start seeing what's being asked, 2, what's being useful and responded back to, and 3, what could actually be a authoritative response. And so what could be an authoritative document to say, this is very useful. This is something that our AI has actually been accessing a lot because a lot of our users are asking questions about this too. And so again, that visibility is great because then now you can start seeing, 1, where that information is very useful, but 2, do I need to lock that down a little better? Do I need to govern that better? Or do I need to improve that better? I could train my agents to even make that even better by understanding where those responses are going awry. And so again, you get that with Purview to say that's another layer on top to give you that visibility and the ability to make that more secure.
So 2 quick questions. One's gonna be quick, one might be a little bit longer. But you mentioned, I wanna check out these events, and I wanna, see what's actually happening over here. Depending on the source of the event that you're trying to take a look at, is it the same level of granularity for what I can actually be notified of for an event? Depending on the source, or is it different? That question. So how deep can I actually get into the eventing? And then the second one would be, you mentioned, like, I get to see all these things. Where? Where do I actually see all this?
So you get granular control literally down to the prompt being asked and the response that is served up, the items that are used to populate that response as well. And so you get that at literally an event level. And so that's what we showed, where I could ask a very specific question. I could see what was responded, and I could see where it pulled those responses from: websites, documents. It was great. So I think that is the granularity we're looking for, and it's literally at a single prompt and response level chained together. And so you can look at that conversation ID. You get a bunch of great metadata to see who's asking this. You can see their IP. So it's really, and also organization. So that granularity built in. And so where I can see that, this is in Purview, but it's in this module in Purview because, again, as Ken mentioned, Purview's giant. So we're looking at, this is the data security posture management for AI. So that recently went GA, so generally available back at Ignite. And so what we're looking for there is to say, that originally was Purview AI Hub. Fantastic. But now is data security posture management for AI. And what this does is it helps you understand, true, again, like your data security posture. How am I positioned to make sure I can have the right level of performance and risk balanced here together? And so in that, there's this activity event viewer. And by looking at those activity events, you can really break that down to look for very specific ones. And they're very friendly names too, which is helpful, not just some weird short names that we might see occasionally. And so when I can look at that as filters, I can really start seeing how that's useful, and I can start looking into it. There's no events or kind of notifications tagged to it. And so the part of that is you have to start building that as part of your patterns to look for these things. So those alerts aren't quite built in yet, but something I always fall back to is you have to make sure that you start looking at this as sort of a regular interval, whichever suits you, because no one just accidentally wakes up and logs into an admin center.
Except for Jocelyn and Ken, actually. Really Ken.
Extensibility here. As I rub my chin, Wendy, that's for you. So this is a very deep question. What role does APIs and whatnot play within this? Do they play any role? Can customers extend these capabilities?
So as far as extensibility, there is a command line interface that works with this. And so you're able to do quite a bit of work that is not just UI work. And so I've seen a couple articles where some folks in MVP world are able to really extend this out, do some scoping of how I'm able to say, I want to scan and classify only certain tables in my Dataverse environment. So that in itself is super useful. But what we're looking at from APIs, there's a lot of intro APIs we use, and essentially is what we call the Purview SDK. And so getting you behind the magic curtain here, that's allowing us to say, hey, Ken, as a user interacting with this information that is labeled a certain level, he wants to copy, he wants to do this action. Can he do it? And so this Purview SDK will look at the protection policies that are available and understand Ken, who has his own role-based access controls to get this. And it says allow or disallow. So with this decision engine that we use internally, it's really built into the entire protection of it all. And so we're able to start making sure that we are consistent in our approach, and it is up, and the endpoints that access this and the users are also being enforced in the proper way from that side. As far as the extensibility endpoints for APIs on the Purview side, there's some other portions that I'm not quite as familiar with. And so I would have to dive a little bit deeper on that.
Follow-up question here, but it's mainly back from something that Sean asked. Let's circle back to RBAC for a second, right? To the control and the access and so on of Purview. Power Platform admin won't necessarily have access to view any of this. Can you maybe describe, the level of granularity of how many roles or the type of roles that are in Purview? In other words, like, does a Power Platform admin have to also be a Purview admin to set this up? Or can they just have some other type of role, or can the CISO or the security professional set these things up and then Power Platform admin to take advantage of these capabilities? That was a long, drawn out thing. I'm sorry, Scott.
That's a great question. And actually, that's a great point of friction that's happening today. So as we mentioned before, it's a coordination among different roles. And so a Power Platform admin typically didn't have any reason to go into Purview, right? Because we didn't have a lot of Purview support. As that's changing, Jocelyn and I, we had a lot of feedback saying, I want to see what's happening here. I want to be able to interact with what's happening here. There's a lot of great insights that are happening inside Purview. I would like to see that too. And the question is, can I do it? And the answer is, Today, not really, because you need a separate role in Purview to do that. Purview has some great ways to partition what you're looking at. And so we might have personas, and they have a risk persona, an audit persona. These are great ways to look at groups of roles. And that's a great way to help you get into it. But then we're looking at configuration. That's actually a very privileged access. And so you're looking at some sort of Purview administrator. And so right now there is no alignment between those two, but it's actually something we've heard quite a lot about from customers. And it's something that we're pursuing to say, how can we get some degree of, a shortcut, a parity to make sure that if I'm an administrator in Power Platform, can I get some shared privilege roles in Purview? That being said, Purview is its own administration center. And so we're looking at ways to make sure that it can actually make sure it maintains the security and the comfort that they're trying to do with those different roles to make sure it extends over to Power Platform as well.
I know just how hard it can be to get those privileges into Microsoft Purview in order to have that full visibility. My favorite way of going about this is to bother Ken while he's at a restaurant, probably with his wife at date night, and ask him to grant me these God-level privileges. And as I've said many times, I can and will sell Ken's cell phone number for him to help you with that too.
She has done that on multiple occasions. Scott, let's talk about maybe bridging the gap a little bit and get away from Jocelyn trying to sell all my PII, which is also protected by these information protection labels, which reminds me, I definitely need to do that with all of my document and information here. So Jocelyn, everything I will be sending you will be encrypted. Now, Scott, any plans to bridge the gap? You just talked about all these different portals and specifically admin portals. I don't want to go to the Microsoft Admin Center, the Purview Admin Center, Intra Admin Center, Power Platform Admin Center, and God knows whatever other admin center that we might have. Do we have any plans going forward to perhaps close the gap a little bit and make things a little bit easier from the Power Platform aspect?
Yeah, so we are under discussions there. I can't share any details at this point, but we understand the friction that's involved there, and it's only going to become more prolific because we will have more connections with Purview. And that being said, it's really tough because as an admin, you might have roles and privileges and abilities spread between Microsoft Admin Center, Power Platform Admin Center, Entra, even Purview Admin Centers, and so it's a pain. And so the problem is to understand, what do I do where? I've seen some improvements inside of Purview to say that there's a co-pilot that allows you to say, what do I do where? And it gives you links to that information to help you get to those parts. I feel like the co-pilot portion is a way to streamline some of that work, but the question is really around how can we make that even more streamlined? That's an ongoing discussion, and we're looking to help flatten that out. And I would say, in addition, if you want to do data loss protection, Microsoft has many flavors of DLP that exist in many different admin centers too. And part of that is also knowing what I want to protect and where. And so that also is another vector we're looking to streamline, because just because it's called the same name doesn't mean it does the same thing.
Thank you for actually bringing up that point about DLP. So folks, DLP is not DLP inside of Power Platform Admin Center. It is now going to be known as connector policies going forward. That name change will be coming soon. Scott, what else is on the roadmap? Can you share any details about future enhancements or anything like that, things that you can say publicly?
Sure. So if we're thinking about, we talked about Copilot Studio agents. And so in Copilot Studio, I can build agents to support a whole host of very custom integrations. And we have that in place of the audits, those events that we talked about, Jocelyn and I talked about at the Ignite Theater session. We're going to start seeing that increase into other named agents or other named Copilot experiences. So Copilot for Sales already has the audits in place, and we're looking to expand that to other named Copilots too. So you'll be able to see those audit events inside Purview. So that's moving forward there. Also, we've already started doing a bit of having label support inside Dataverse. And so Dataverse is the common data service for Power Platform and Dynamics. The great part about that is, as we're getting these database protections, we'll get those labels in place. We'll get the protections in place. And so that's starting to come too. We're doing work on that now. And we have the ability to sync. So if you are a customer using Purview Data Map to scan your Dataverse environments, you might have some classifications applied where I can find those sensitive information types. I may even have labels applied too. If I have those labels, they're kind of stuck in Purview Data Map right now. And so very useful for those roles. But for the makers and those of us in Power Platform, we may not see that, may not be able to understand it, really interact with sensitive data. We're starting to do a sync with that. And so now I'm able to sync those labels from Purview Data Map into the Dataverse experience. And so now I can understand that I'm working with labeled information. And so we're doing that now, and that is a private preview. So again, if you are automatically using those now, to say I'm labeling my Dataverse environments through data map, we'd love for you to join this preview, and you can start looking at this sync moving forward. And then we're further expanding that too. So spending plenty of interactions between the different teams, with Purview teams and Power Platform and business applications teams, to say, how can we expand this further? Plenty more coming up by the end of this fiscal year. And so we're looking forward to that. Can't quite share those details yet.
Well, it sounds like there's amazing stuff down the pipe for Purview and Power Platform integration. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. By the way, I kept on mentioning, and I'll do it one more time, that theater session. Hey, so if somebody wasn't able to view it because we didn't broadcast those theater sessions, how would somebody be able to view that demo that was provided during your theater session? Is there any way for those of us that weren't lucky enough to get to Ignite to be able to view it?
So luckily, Jocelyn, my co-presenter in crime here, was able to pre-record this session. And so we were able to do that. And so we expect to have some of that distributed in different areas. I'm not sure if the entire session will be shared, but I think we'll have clips of that.
It's like 95% of the session, I believe, minus a couple of jokes and some teasers. But yes, hopefully we have that on YouTube maybe by the time this airs. So stay tuned. It'll definitely be there.
Yes.
Did we talk about data security and pizza in our recorded session?
Didn't come up with our formalized joke yet, but if you want to tell me, Scott, do you think our security is tight? Are you a fan of our security?
I'm a fan of our security. I think our security can be difficult to understand at first as a new person, but I've learned that the more I learn, the more I get to be a fan of it.
So then if you had to compare our security to like a specific region's pizza, which one would you pick?
I would go with New York pizza. It's portable, has good usability, has a good affordance to know I can grab it and know what I can do with it. And it's actually a good user experience in the end. So I'm a big fan of it.
Hold up.
Me too,
Hold up.
Scott.
Those qualities you apply to the security sounds like a different mode of pizza that our buddy Austin introduced us to. The Pizza Pocket, also affordable and highly mobile. Thank you.
Actually, it sounds more like a maple bar. But with that, I think what we should do is actually land this plane, Sean. So, would you mind doing us the honors and channel your inner Wendy and bring us home?
Of course, landing a plane with perfection. Thank you so much for coming on, Scott. We really appreciate your time. We'd love to have you back on, especially to talk about those new advancements that will be coming out with the Purview and Power Platform integration, and to talk about how organizations can easily implement all these new security features. Like you said, it could be intimidating at first, could be confusing. We want to limit that barrier of entry for all of our users and make sure everybody's successful. So thank you so much, Scott, for joining, and we look forward to having you on again.
Right. Thanks for having me. Thank you.